Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a viewer ask a question about different muscle groups and rep ranges, and he's like, well, I've heard that certain muscles respond better to certain rep ranges, like hamstrings respond best to fast concentrics and slow eccentrics in the 3 to 5 rep range. The traps respond best to static work. Back muscles like higher reps, the rest of the back muscles. And so is there any truth to this? Let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing. Work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. You know what? There's only a small amount of truth to this, and it only comes to certain muscles. Now, the reason people have come up with this idea is because what they've looked at is different muscle biopsies over the years that show that within our species, even within a given individual, muscle fiber distribution is not the same from muscle to muscle. We have certain muscles that have more fast twitch fibers ratios versus slow twitch fibers overall compared to the rest of our body. Now, what people also need to understand is that we're also dealing with humans as a species who don't even have that many fast twitch fibers. Humans are actually an endurance species all around anyways compared to other animals, but that's a totally different topic. One reason we're pound for pound weaker than most other mammals. But, you know, we're good at outrunning them over long distance. Humans who actually do run regularly and are in good cardiovascular shape can't outrun a horse given enough time. Given a long enough open field, enough days to do it, they will catch a horse. And that has been found to be true. So we're not really a fast twitch fiber dominant species anyways, but that's kind of a sidetrack. The thing is, what we find is that rep range, honestly, for most muscle groups matters less than you think it does. This idea that we have a hypertrophy range, you know, that 8 to 12 rep range, well, what that usually means is that it gives maximum growth with the fewest sets. That's actually what the hypertrophy rep range means. But if you're talking about just stimulating muscle growth, there's no difference. In fact, even Brad Schoenfeld did a study that showed that people who do like 7 or 8 sets of 3, even with a moderate weight, you know, it doesn't have to be like you're thinking 85, 90%. People doing it down at even like 75% for fast reps, 7 to 8 sets of 3 produces just as much muscle growth, the exact same amount of muscle growth that 3 sets of 10 does. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that total workload and total tonnage actually matters more than rep ranges. You know what else we found? 5 sets of 5 produces almost identical growth to 3 sets of 10. Well, these are very different rep ranges. So 3 rep sets, 5 rep sets, 10 rep sets all produce identical amounts of growth. When we extrapolate it over a couple months and look at it, they produce the same amount of muscle growth in various muscles, quads, chest, biceps. So what's going on there? That means that rep range doesn't even matter that much. And what about when we've looked at studies on ultra high reps? You know what we've also found is that when people do ultra high reps to failure, I'm talking over 20 rep sets, and they're compared, the metabolites to that between people doing the 8 to 12 rep range, when they do the same amount of sets, guess what? They produce the same muscle growth. And I'm talking weights like 20 to 30% of your 1 rep max. Like people usually can do 8 to 12 with 70% of their max. That's normal. But we're talking as low as 20 to 30% of your max. If you do the same number of sets, whether it's 3 or 4 sets of 25 rep sets to muscle failure, versus working in the 8 to 12 rep range at like 70%, it produced in studies the same amount of muscle growth. Same amount of muscle growth. Rep range doesn't matter that much. Rep range trains performance elements. All right, rep range trains performance elements. It doesn't determine muscle growth. Total tonnage and workload seems to when you're in a certain threshold, meaning when you're anywhere between, say, 60 to 90% intensity, all that seems to actually matter is how much total tonnage you move. That seems to be the only really significant factor in determining how much muscle growth you get. And it's not proportionate, mind you, meaning it's not if you double your tonnage, you're not going to get total the muscle growth. You might get 10% more muscle growth. So put that in perspective. But yeah, your actual tonnage does. How much work you actually did is what seems to matter. And when you go to higher reps, it's still just an issue of volume. Still just an issue of overall volume. And with really high reps, going to failure seems to be actually pretty beneficial. So this whole rep range thing doesn't matter. What you're talking about is performance elements. What you find is that when you lift really fast and explosively with low reps, your speed strength increases slightly. If you do a lot of training from a pause, a dead stop, your speed strength and your starting strength tends to increase. When you do a lot of really high reps, your strength stamina tends to increase. Performance elements are most affected by training style. Muscle growth itself isn't particularly affected by it. It just really isn't. It really isn't. And people way overvalue certain things. You know, they way overvalue certain things. And they act like these things produce different muscle growth. They don't. All your muscles ultimately care about is tension and fatigue. How much tension you subject them to and how much metabolic fatigue. And you know what? We've also found there's even been studies that showed that rest pause training produced similar muscle growth results to doing multiple sets. And that's where it gets even trickier, because if we do things a certain way, even tonnage becomes less important. Tonnage and rep range both become less important, because what they found in some Australian studies I saw a while back, they produced similar muscle growth by taking a weight that was almost a 10 rep max and doing an 8 to 10 rep set, getting it almost to failure, then resting 5 or 6 seconds and grinding out a couple more reps. Resting 5 or 6 seconds and grinding out a couple more reps. Resting 5 or 6 seconds, getting another rep. You know what they found? That when they did those extended sets like that with the same weight, they got very similar metabolites to taking multiple sets out to 10 reps. Why? Because the upper threshold fibers were forced to be recruited again. Meaning a lot of what we see for muscle growth is about recruiting certain upper threshold muscle fibers that actually have a lot of growth potential but don't get worked until you do either a lot of work with them, meaning, you know, you've got to take like a 10 rep max to probably at least 6 or 7 reps before those upper threshold fibers start firing in, because the other fibers are able to handle the weight up until then, or you have to do a heavy weight that's 85 to 90% of your max or more to recruit them on the first rep, right? Or you've got to move a moderate weight really, really fast explosively. But what they found is that those subsequent reps recruited the same muscle fibers that the last couple of reps did in the normal 10 rep sets. And they didn't have to go through the other fatiguing reps first, because the breaks were so short. Taking only 5 or 6 seconds didn't allow everything to recover enough. So the upper threshold muscle fibers were forced to be recruited again for every rep. And that produced similar growth. And even so, tonnage can even be bypassed in some cases with certain training styles. So really, this stuff doesn't matter a lot. The only muscles in the body that might respond to different rep ranges than that are going to be, we have a couple sets of muscles in our body that are almost all slow twitch fibers that you have very, very few fast twitch fibers in. And that's going to be your forearms and in some cases your calves. They tend to respond more to stamina. But they'll still grow from heavy work. But you know what? Forearms actually get hit with a lot of stamina with normal training. Meaning people who don't use straps for anything, their forearms have to do a tremendous amount of work on all of their deadlifts, their rowing, their pull-ups, their chin-ups. In fact, most of the work that you do, your forearms are under constant tension for a full set, right? Even if you deadlift or rowing or whatever, you might be going through eccentrics and concentrics and pauses and everything else through there, right? But your forearms never get to stop working. How about when you go to do a chin-up or a pull-up? Most people aren't starting the set immediately, but their forearms are having to work hard to grip them and their body weight plus whatever weight they're adding before the first rep even starts and after the last rep ends. The forearms never get a break on any of those exercises. So they're designed to grip and have to hold things. So by training that way and not using straps or anything, the forearms actually still get all that stamina work, and they get a lot of it. I mean, people who are on balance programs who do a lot of big compound movements, people who do deadlifts, chin-ups, pull-ups, rows, power cleans, all that stuff, your forearms are getting worked continually. Even if people do front squats, forearms are getting worked. So they're getting subjected to that anyways, and you can usually tell what sort of training someone does when you look at their forearms. That's oftentimes a dead giveaway as to what they really do, because forearms do respond to stamina training more, and the same could be said for calves to some extent. but calves do have a larger genetic component for growth. So yeah, I mean, outside of the calves and the forearms, I think it's fair to say that most of the other muscle groups, people overvalue rep ranges, and this idea that any given muscle is going to respond better to any given rep range isn't really based on reality. That's not really how it works. And someone who says, well, I tried this for a while and it seemed to work. Well, no, you just put more workload in. That's why it worked. You did more work for that muscle. You did more workload, or you got on a better system of training for it. And that's why it started responding and growing. It wasn't because you changed the rep range. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.